So it seems journalist Rupert Myers... Oh, sorry. Let me try that again. So it seems pretend journalist Rupert Myers has been sacked from his pretend journalism jobs because he's been accused of sexual assault. Well, that's interesting. Let's have a little look at the article.
Rupert Myers has been sacked by not only British GQ, but the Spoon too have this evening confirmed that the sleazy and creepy journalist is no longer writing for them. Myers earlier today was forced to deactivate his Twitter after journalist Kate Lever exposed the shocking sexual harassment she suffered at the hands of the shamed journalist. Lever took to Twitter telling her thousands of followers, "When I moved to London, I wanted to make friends. I met Rupert Myers on Twitter and agreed to go for what I thought was a friendly drink. Whilst Lever explained to Myers that she would rather be friends, she was greeted with the response, "I've got enough mates, I'd rather fuck you," before he forced himself onto her.
Now, as you all know, I'm a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty. And just because someone makes some allegations towards someone, it doesn't mean that that person has necessarily done the crime. However, in this case, Rupert has actually admitted guilt.
Lever is understood to have received an apology via direct message on Twitter today from Myers, which she says isn't quite enough. Jane Merrick of The Spoon confirmed Myers' departure, adding, "I was horrified to read these allegations. As I have said over the past week, I applaud the bravery of any women in speaking out." Before departing Twitter today, Myers issued an apology saying he was truly sorry for his actions.
Now, the way I see it, there are two possibilities here. The first possibility is that Rupert is actually guilty, which makes the most sense. And then there is the extremely less likely possibility that Rupert is actually innocent but has admitted guilt anyway because of some male feminist self-loathing or something like that. I don't think the second possibility is all that likely, so I think it's pretty safe to go with the first one. So at this point, some of you may be wondering why I'm talking about this story in the propaganda of toxic feminism. After all, this series is designed to debunk bullshit and lies spread about the men's rights movement. And some male feminist journalist being accused of sexual assault really doesn't fit into that category, does it? Well, it does in a way, because Rupert Myers has written articles before on the men's rights movement. One in particular called "Men's Rights Activists Are Cave-Dwelling Idiots." Now, GQ has since taken down the article, and I haven't been able to find a complete version of it. However, I did find some segments on Bernard Chapin's website. So let's have a little look at the sections of this article I can actually find.
The men's rights movement begins and ends with the argument that there is no pre-existing imbalance between the rights of men and women, or that if there is any injustice, it is an imbalance which prejudices men.
No, actually, we do believe that there are many issues that affect men and women, often in different ways. We just don't think feminism is the correct method of dealing with either men's issues or women's issues. Next.
This is dressed up in any number of concerns, some of which might seem entirely sensible.
Might seem entirely sensible, really. They only seem that way. Getting longer sentences just seems to be an issue. It's not really an issue. The high male suicide rate just seems to be an issue. It's not really all that sensible, right? Next.
But which cumulatively amount to an activism which is hostile to women.
Oh, we're not really about the issues, we're actually just about hating women, right? That's interesting from someone who's just lost his job for sexually assaulting numerous women. Oh, the irony. How fucking ironic is that? Next.
Issues like the rights of fathers in family proceedings are used to prop up a nostalgia for a time when men had an easier time of it, a time when men could be assured of jobs, power and status, a time before feminism.
Oh, I see. We want to go back to the 1950s. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, right. Because back in the 1950s, they really gave a shit about men's issues, right? I mean, ironically, the last thing we want to do is go back to traditionalism. We're actually trying to free men from gender roles. I mean, ultimately, it should be up to individuals what roles they choose, but men should have options just like women. Next.
The aura of victimhood adopted by MRAs extends to criticizing the extent of coverage of female genital mutilation at the expense of discussing male circumcision.
Now, he uses a very, very common dismissal trick here, and that is referring to the female issue as female genital mutilation, whereas he's referring to the male issue as male circumcision. Now, if you're going to be honest and consistent, you should refer to both as circumcision or alternatively both as genital mutilation. But what you don't do is use the more severe term for the women's issue and the less sounding severe term for the men's issue. I see this all the time. It's just another means of dismissal and it's fucking dishonest. Next.
MRAs routinely deny the existence of what many feminists call rape culture, by suggesting that failures to prosecute sexual violence are the result of endemic false rape allegations, rather than societal attitudes towards consent.
Once again, incredibly ironic. It seems that this guy is telling us, he's lecturing us about society's attitudes towards consent when he really didn't give a shit about consent, right? Just incredibly fucking ironic. Unless, of course, the allegations are false, which would be strange because he's admitted to it. But if the allegations were false, that would also be ironic because he shits all over the notion of false allegations. So he's fucked either way. And we're not suggesting there is an epidemic of false rape allegations, just that those accused deserve to have due process. Although there is a major issue in universities in America where the burden of proof has dropped to basically someone's word. Now, I still don't know if I'd call it an epidemic, but it is much more of an issue. And that's what happens when you take away due process. People will abuse the system. There will be more false rape allegations. That's simple. Next.
When the founder of MRA site, A Voice for Men, Paul Elam wrote a piece entitled, Bill Cosby's Victims, or just a bunch of drug-whoring starfuckers, he was displaying an overt hostility towards women that characterizes the movement.
No, he very clearly states in that article he's not talking about all women. He's talking about a particular type of women which may be called groupies, or women who are willing to trade sex for drugs. So let's have a look at a small snippet from that article.
Like it or not, drugs are chick magnets. Of course, I will figuratively grit my teeth and point out that not all women are like this. Indeed, not nearly all women do drugs at all, including a bunch of them who would fuck Bill Cosby simply because he is Bill Cosby. And including the women who would fuck Bill Cosby simply because he has been accused of sexual violence. Of course, whatever actually happened between the sudden explosion of Cosby accusers and the 78-year-old comedian is a matter of pure speculation. Nothing, absolutely nothing has been proven as a matter of due process. In that sense, as of today he is demonstrably innocent of all charges.
And, you know, the ironic thing is if Rupert Myers hadn't admitted fault when it came to the sexual assault allegations, I'm damn positive Paul Elam would have the same attitude towards him, despite the fact that Rupert has written fucking hit pieces on us in the past. I'm positive Paul would still say he's innocent until proven guilty. And for the record, I hold the same position. Next.
Over 50 women have accused Bill Cosby of sexual assault. Yet Elam goes to bat for Cosby.
No, Elam doesn't go to bat for Bill Cosby. He goes to bat for due process and the fact that we should assume that someone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. People should not be tried via social media. And once again, that includes Rupert Myers. If he hadn't admitted guilt, that is. As for the 50 women who have accused Bill Cosby of sexual assault, I see three possibilities. The first possibility is that they are all telling the truth. Every single one of them. All 50 women are telling the truth. I find this a little bit hard to believe. It's a high-profile case. Cosby is a high-profile celebrity. Once some of the allegations started, there would have to be at least one or two women who would jump on the bandwagon and make an allegation to get publicity or attention. Now, I'm not saying all, but there would have to be at least one, I imagine. The second possibility is they're all lying. Once again, I find this hard to believe that all 50 women aren't telling the truth. There would have to be at least some women who have had some experience with Cosby. Now, what that experience is, I can't say because I wasn't there. The third possibility is that the truth is somewhere between option 1 and option 2. Some are telling the truth and some are lying. But, we don't really know because it was decades ago and involved drugs, and there's really no evidence apart from hearsay. Although I will admit I'm no expert on the case.
When Reggie Yates investigated these men who think feminism has gone too far for a BBC documentary, he found advocates for decriminalizing rape on private land, homophobes, and racist defenders of men's rights, and a tsunami of death and rape threats aimed at prominent feminists.
The Reggie Yates documentary on the men's rights movement, where he spent 98% of the time talking to people who weren't MRAs. How convenient. I think he spent most of the time talking to Roosh V, which is the decriminalising rape on private land bit that Rupert has put in here. I mean, Rupert's really done his research, right? He's done extensive research. He watched a bias documentary by Reggie Yates, which used non-MRAs as MRAs. And basically this is the only way that Rupert can make a case against us, is to, falsely associate us with the pickup artists, and then basically claim that we're all pro-rape or whatever. Which is ironic, considering he's admitted to sexually assaulting numerous women. Now, I also find the death and rape threats aimed at prominent feminists to be interesting. Once again, the person they talked to was not an MRA. He was just some troll on the internet who had been arrested for sending death threats or whatever. Of course, from memory, Reggie Yates talked to Laurie Penny, who claimed that, every threat she got was from the evil MRAs, none of which she ever proved, of course. Now, why this is interesting is because Rupert not only likes to sexually assault women, it seems, but has also made death threats on Twitter. Could Obama murder Trump and Pence, then pardon himself, asking for humanity? Now look, obviously this is a joke, and it's the type of thing that I don't take serious, right? And to be honest, I don't think Rupert should even be criticised for this. But it's the double standard I want to point out. If an MRA suggested that Trump should murder Hillary and then pardon himself, that would be used as the MRA's war against women and our hatred of women, etc., etc., and a clear example of a death threat towards a woman, even though it would clearly be a joke, right? And that's one of the problems I have with people like Rupert Myers and the social justice crowd, is they will bend over backwards to find any fault on our side. And even, the slightest joke will be exaggerated into a terrible death threat. and they'll falsely associate people with us who clearly aren't MRAs just to make a point. They'll go to any lengths to make a point, yet at the same time they're massive fucking hypocrites. Is that Mundane Matt? I'm pretty sure that's Mundane Matt.
Well, how you doing? Today we're going to talk about men's rights. Yeah, all you men out there, get off the couch, stop watching sports. Get active involved, man. Stand up, take charge of your household, man.
It's a little known fact, but Paul Elam has a pair of sunglasses just like that.
Hello, YouTube. It's Opinion Dude. Today we're going to be discussing who I think are the bravest people online. And perhaps the bravest people in the entire world. Let's just get right into it. I think men's rights activists are in fact the bravest people on this planet right now. If I am feeling bold today, which I am. MRAs, as they like to be called, they are doing something nobody has ever done. Let's have some background facts. First, men as a species, the numbers have been declining.
So, men as a species? So we're a separate species than women? I'm confused. And here I thought I knew a lot about biology, but apparently I'm a noob.
So, yeah, stand up. So, form a men's group, man. Men's club. Yeah. So that way, you know, it's men only, right? Yeah, it's a men only club, man.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The men's rights movement is men only. We would never like any women in the men's rights movement. No, that would be that would be crazy. Oh, I get it. Mundane Matt here thinks that MRAs are all fundamentalist Christians. Because there's no atheists in the movement. There's absolutely no atheists in the men's rights movement. No prominent atheists either. We're all fundamentalist Christians. Yep.
Rapidly since Reagan left office in 1988. No presidential administration since then, since Reagan left office, has had any sort of policy put in place to help curb the rapid decline in numbers among the male species. And men's rights activists are just trying to get the issue out there through various means, and they're just hoping that somebody, anybody in a position of power will listen and do something about it. You know, maybe pass along Congress.
Oh, I get it. So apparently our only issue is that we believe the number of men, that is the species male, is declining. We don't have any other issues. We just believe that the number of men are declining like the buffalo or something. And Reagan was the last men's rights friendly president. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. She's obviously studied MRAs to really understand what we're on about. And what the fuck is with that picture in the background? What the fuck? And why have people written all over her walls? It's just a little bit bizarre.
Right. No women allowed, man. Right. So that's what you need to do, man. So that's what you need to do. And stand up, because, yeah, we're just being treated like fucking doormats, man. You don't want to be like a fucking doormat, do you? Everybody walk all over you, man. Stand up, be proud to be a man, man. That's right, just stand up, be proud to be a fucking man. They don't like it, that's their problem, man. Yeah, tell the feminists and the lesbians and everybody else, you don't like it, you can kiss this, right?
Yeah, maybe you should take that advice. and while you're at it, put some clothing on. Just, please. Just a shirt or something. A pair of pants, maybe.
Jesus Christ was the original MRA. The original men's rights activist. You know, someone mentioned that he is Sarkeesian. He is Sarkeesian. She gets on and makes videos and tries to talk to authorities when God knows she shouldn't.
Oh, I get it. So people don't like Anita Sarkeesian because of the Bible, as opposed to her dishonest reviews of video games. Well, that makes a lot more sense now. I'm glad you cleared that up.
I think the bravest ones and the trailblazers, in my personal opinion, are in fact the ones that make feminist cringe compilation videos on YouTube, which are just funny and cringy videos of feminists doing stuff. And
Oh, I get it. So you don't know the difference between your generic anti-feminist and a men's rights activist, because apparently only men's rights activists make feminist cringe compilations, right? That's all we do. Oh, apart from trying to save the male species from extinction. Yep.
That's what you say, man. Stand up, be proud to be a man. That's what I am. I'm proud to be a fucking man, man. You don't like it because I'm a fucking man? Yeah, you know what you can do? You can go fuck yourself, you know?
There should not be a woman in authority according to the Bible. According to the Bible, it says no woman should be in authority. No woman. I think Sarkeesian and feminism. Feminism isn't real. It's a tool of Satan and the Baptists.
Come to think of it, that is a very, very good point, Mundane Matt. You've converted me. I am no longer an atheist now.
And the comments are just the MRAs, men's rights activists, saying things like triggered, and it's really funny. And
Oh, I get it. So that's how you determine if someone is an MRA or not. You look at a feminist cringe video on YouTube, and if they've commented there, then they must be an MRA. Apparently that's the one criteria. Now I know how all these feminist journalists determine whether someone is an MRA or not. This has been very informative. I'm glad I watched this video.
So that's my theory, man. So let's get the clubs going, anything like that, man. Get some networking going or something like that. Make some videos.
Yeah, we should start doing that right away. But I have to wonder, where did you get that fedora from? Because that doesn't seem to be the stock standard patriarchy issue MRA fedora. That seems to be something a little bit different.
It is quite obvious that feminism is used to put men down so that the Bible can be destroyed. Jesus Christ was a man. Everything men's rights activists believe in, Jesus believed.
I think they're really inspiring, and I think more people need to know about them. So, you can go on Google and type in men's rights activists and read up all about it. Thanks for watching today, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you have a good day, and you sleep well tonight.
Up there, maybe research. If I find anything down below, man, I'll find something down below, but,
Everything feminists believe in, Jesus did not believe it. It's right there in black and white.
Now, I haven't read the Bible in years, but I seem to remember that section of the Bible where Jesus clearly said that he's against everything that feminism stands for, especially the artwork done with menstrual blood. He really fucking hated that stuff. But, I mean, who doesn't?
In God's book, King James Version, the only true version, I don't understand you. I don't. Hold on. You're making me itch.
yeah, it's hard to find any good men's clubs, going on, men's rights, but, yeah. Yeah. Just gotta do that, man. Yeah, if I find anything, I'll put down below, right? But, yeah. Do the research up there, man. Remember men's rights, man. Yeah, we gotta stand up and take charge now, man. Yeah. Fuck that shit being walked over. I'm tired of being a doormat, man. I'm proud to be a man, man. I'm 100% proud to be a damn man. So if you don't like it, that's your problem.
Hold on a second, that's not a fucking fedora. You're not an MRA.
So anyway, don't know much what else to say much, but yeah, we just got to get together somehow and stand up and go to meetings and organize and try to take this country back, take our lives back, man. Yeah. And fuck the feminists, fuck the lesbians.
Fuck the lesbians? You do realise lesbians are into chicks, right? Did you hear that, Karen? You need to shut up.
Fuck you, Bane.
The Bible says they're women. You need to be taught at home. You don't need to own cameras.
Yeah, right about now, I wish you didn't own a camera. Put some fucking pants on. And a shirt.
And God knows I'm a good Christian man. But just women, you need to either get big and plump.
Yeah. Yeah, they're ruining this country, man. Yeah, so anyway, that's all I got to say about that, man. Have a nice day.
Well, that was very, very informative. I'm so glad I came across that video. I feel so much more educated now. But I have to ask the question, how long is it going to be until a feminist uses this guy as an example of a typical MRA? I imagine if a feminist came across this guy, they would not realise that he's meant to be taking the piss out of us, but actually think he's serious. I think they're that delusional and desperate to find dirt on us. They would take this guy and present him as, a typical MRA. We should start a pool as to when that's going to happen. It can't be too far off, if it hasn't happened already. So his video goes on for another 3 minutes like that. So I'm just going to mute him and put it in the background while I talk a bit about comedy, or how feminists often fail at comedy. Now, satirizing something or doing a parody of something can be a very effective way of getting across a point. You can show hypocrisy in your opponents, or you can point out flaws in their ideology. However, if you're going to satirize something or parody something, it should actually be based on what that group believes in. For example, if I did a parody of feminism, and I claimed that feminism believed in your inner thetans, and you had to use an e-meter to measure your inner thetans, because it's a real feminist belief, and they believed that millions of years ago on another planet there was a guy called Xenu who threw people into a volcano. It wouldn't be a very effective parody of feminism, because feminism doesn't believe in those things. Now, there is an exception to this rule. I could be combining Scientology and feminism together to make a point. Maybe I'm pointing out how they have similar beliefs, or maybe I'm putting two very different things together, and that's where the comedy is. But if I'm doing a straight parody of supposedly feminist talking points, then I should actually use actual feminist talking points. And this is where feminism fails when they try to do parodies of MRAs. They actually just do parodies of straw men, not of actual MRAs. They don't understand who we are or what we believe in. They're just going off stereotypes which have been created in echo chambers. So, you know, the typical stereotype is where right-wing fundamentalist Christians who don't believe in women's rights and want women back in the kitchen, like in the 1950s, etc., etc. Or we're dude bros who wear fedoras and, you know, shit like that, which we're about to see in a second. In fact, let's go to that clip now.
I saw the movie, it changed my mind, but there's still a lot of people out there who are critical about it. And here are two such people. Please welcome, from men's rights activists, Chad and Chad! Okay, all right, so, Chad and Chad, so I guess it's safe to say you did not see the new Ghostbusters movie.
I think I'll save the dude bro stuff for a future video. But just before I go on to the next segment, let me show you one more clip.
Well, hello there, boys and girls. How you doing today, boys and girls? Yeah, well, today we're going to talk about men's rights. Yeah. Today, 2015, men have no rights in the United States of America. Yeah, the feminists have taken over. All the feminists and all the lesbians.
Now, does that ring a bell? Just in case it doesn't, look at this.
If I find anything down below, I'll put it down below. Do the research, boys and girls. You know how to do the research, right? So up there, and you know, up there, maybe research. If I find anything down below, man, I'll find something down below. But
those videos were made about 10 months apart. It seems he didn't write any new material in that time for some reason. And the video with the devil mask, he goes on like that for 8 minutes. But don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to that. We've got some more important stuff to talk about. Okay, so let's continue with the Rational Wiki's article on the men's rights movement, and they're presenting our main talking points and then doing a bit of a rebuttal, which in numerous cases actually supports our talking points and isn't a rebuttal at all. So the next one on the list is war, male-only militaries, and male-only drafts.
Most countries only require men to participate in the draft or national services. This means life has higher chance to be put at risk in those countries, simply by being born male and possibly having to go to war.
Yes, and I would agree with that. Now, I don't talk about the draft very often because I think there are more immediate issues that concern men. I mean, while you've been watching this video, there have been men who have committed suicide. There have been newborn baby boys which have had their genitals mutilated. There are men who are homeless. There are male victims of domestic abuse who don't have any services. These things are happening right now, this very minute. And although in America men are still forced to sign up to the draft, at this very minute they're not technically forced into the military. Now that could change at any moment, although it's probably unlikely after Vietnam. But it still is a possibility, and it still is a requirement put on men which isn't put on women. And that's really the point. If you are a person who believes in equality, regardless of what label you use, regardless of whether you call yourself a feminist or an MRA or an egalitarian or a humanist or what the fuck ever, or maybe you don't use any label at all, but you still believe in equality. If you claim to believe in equality, then you should have one of two positions. The first position is you believe in no draft for anyone. You just get rid of the draft, you scrap it. This is where I would stand. Or alternatively, the second position is you believe the draft should be for everyone who is able-bodied, regardless of gender, regardless of religion or political affiliation or race or sexuality or whatever. If you are physically able to serve your country during the time of war, then you should be part of the draft. That's simple. Now, if you hold the position that some people, based on their gender, should be signing up for the draft, whereas others shouldn't, then you aren't for equality. That's simple. Or if you think that it's not an example of discrimination against men, then you really don't care about equality. But let's hear what their rebuttal is of our talking points.
This borders on red herring, as nearly every nation in the developed world has stopped compulsory enlistment, and the ones which haven't often have neutral foreign policies. Sweden, for example, was already opposing it in 2002 for the very reason that it was undermining gender equality. They finally scrapped it in 2010.
Okay then, why argue against us? If it's not a big deal, right, if countries are getting rid of it or whatever, why not agree with us? Why not agree that it should either be for no one or should be for everyone who is able-bodied? Why then try to turn this into a competition? Now, I guarantee you, if it was a requirement placed on women alone, even if it wasn't enacted, but just had the possibility of one day being enacted, the writer of this article would have a very, very different opinion. It would be an example of the patriarchy and oppression, and you get the idea. Let's continue.
Nations that do enforce the draft for women, for example Israel, are in the minority. Nevertheless, many that single out males for conscription simultaneously portray women in a harshly negative light. Think of the get back in the kitchen trope.
So what the author tries to do in their rebuttal is to portray the fact that society sees women in a negative light, and that is why they've been kept out of the draft and out of the military. Now, in my opinion, there are two reasons why women have been kept out of the draft and out of the military in general. The first reason is typically women are physically weaker than men. They're smaller in size, don't have the same body mass or muscle mass. The obvious example of this is the Olympics, where in the vast majority of sports, men and women do not compete against each other because men would have an unfair advantage. However, having said that, I still believe that any woman who is physically capable of doing a job in the military should be given the opportunity. And if we are going to require physically able men to do those jobs by making them sign the draft, then the exact same requirement should be on all physically able women. It's that simple. But there is a second reason why women are excluded from the draft and historically from the military, and that is society likes to protect women more than men. Now, the funny thing is, this rebuttal actually makes that point more than once during their rebuttal. Now, another thing I should point out is when last year it was proposed that maybe women should be included in the draft in America, there were a number of feminists who came out and made those 2 points that I just made. Women are less physically capable, and women should be a protected class. Now, let me stress, not all feminists believe this. There are a lot of feminists who would agree with MRAs that the draft should be scrapped, or it should be for everyone. And to be honest, I don't know what the numbers are of feminists who believe that it should be men only or it should be scrapped. As far as I know, no one's done any studies to figure out those numbers. And it's hard to tell because most feminists just don't talk about the draft. But let me present a couple of feminist articles or snippets from feminist articles who came out last year saying that the draft should be for men only and women should be excluded because of those 2 reasons I mentioned.
If equality means sending my daughters to war, I want no part of it. Though our nation hasn't had a draft since the 1970s, selective service registration remains a reality for young men. I admit that, as a mom to 2 young girls, the draft is not something I have ever given much thought to. It was only when I heard that Congress is seeking to expand selective service requirements to include both genders that I realized how much I oppose it. This week the U.S. Senate approved a military expansion bill that will, among other things, require women who turn 18 on or after January 1, 2018 to register for the draft. The amendment, dubbed Draft America's Daughters, is part of the National Defense Authorization Act. Not registering could have ramifications our boys already face, including the loss of federal grants for education. Some feminists are hailing it as a boon toward their cause, calling America's history of the all-male draft discriminatory and the addition of women to selective service a huge leap for equality. But being a feminist doesn't have to mean standing up for sending our daughters to war. When you are not included in something that no one wants to do, in this case, going off to war, it's not discrimination. It's a privilege. Some say women should give up that privilege in the name of equality between men and women. But here's the thing about equality, men and women are not equal. That's right, I'm a feminist, I am a mother of 2 girls, and I am saying that men and women are not equal. In the event of a draft, sending women off to war does not present an equal opportunity to women by nature of the fact that women are physically different from men. As much as we may work to try to level the playing field between men and women, the physical differences between us as created by nature make us inherently unequal and cannot be universally overcome. No mother, whether she has sons or daughters, ever wishes to send her child off to war. However, if I had sons, I could at least take comfort in knowing that our nation's young men are the most able-bodied people to take on this task and therefore most likely to return home to us safely. Should my daughters grow up to choose a career in military service, I would support them 100%, but the number of women who feel physically and emotionally capable of taking on that role are the exception and not the rule. Preserving the mother choice, why you should oppose a female draft. I'm a feminist, a law professor, a Mormon, and a mother. And in each of these capacities, I am advocating opposition to the extension of the military draft to women. Last week the Senate voted overwhelmingly in support of extending selective service registration to women. The bill is now in congressional committee before being sent to the President. Which leads to my objection to extending the draft to women. Isn't this just a matter of equality? As a law professor, I understand the importance of equal obligations in a system of justice. If men can be drafted, shouldn't women also be subject to a potential draft? I remain unconvinced. Several major religious traditions hold that a woman's greatest role is raising her children at home. And many women sincerely believe as much, without cowering to husbands or religious leaders. Other women want to join the military and agree to leave children and/or opportunities for childbearing and child-rearing behind while they are gone. I'm happy they can make that choice. But it is a different matter to create a law that can force any woman to give up, at the government's beck and call, getting pregnant, having a child, breastfeeding her baby, raising her preschoolers, being home when her kids get out of school each day, or even preparing to start a family and finding a partner? Keep in mind that women have a relatively short window of healthy fertility and childbearing. Have we considered the psychological effects on women who are drafted against their will, specially taken from their children and opportunities to have children, when they sincerely believe it is their life mission to build a family? What happens psychologically to women who are torn from their children? Have you ever heard of a mother bear? What is the effect on children of having their mothers taken from them? What about breastfeeding women? Medical science shows that it is significantly better for the physical and psychological health of both the baby and the mother to breastfeed the baby, reducing cancer risks for both, providing immunities to the baby, and improved healing and health for both. Will breastfeeding moms be excluded from the draft? According to the Selective Service's own website, if Congress and the President were to reinstate a military draft, Selective Service procedures currently in place would not treat married registrants, or those with a dependent child, any differently from men who are single. Would the same be true for women?
I find it interesting that she talks about the psychological impact of separating a mother from her children, yet really doesn't seem that concerned about the psychological impact of forcing men into a war that they don't want to fight. I imagine having your legs blown off by a landmine also has some kind of psychological impact, even if you're just a male, right? Although apparently that's not as important for some reason. Now, let me stress once again, the opinions of these feminists do not represent every single feminist. However, I do think they represent a large portion of society which sees the protection of women to be much more important than the protection of men. And that's exactly why I think it would be a great thing if women were included in the draft. Now, that may seem like I'm contradicting myself from earlier, but I'm actually not. I did say earlier that I'm against the draft for everyone. That's true. And I think the best way to drop the draft altogether is if we force women into it. If that were to happen, then society would have a very different opinion on the draft. All of a sudden it would be about bodily integrity rights and the rights of an individual, and we shouldn't force people into war. And actually that's what we're seeing with just bringing it up as an option. There are a lot of feminists who are making these points, who I think have been silent in the past. One even started a petition making these points. So if we're discussing how unfair the draft is to women, we're also discussing how unfair it is to men, and we're more likely to get it dropped altogether. Now, once again, in fairness, there are feminist groups who have a long history of fighting against a draft for everyone, or alternatively, wanting women included. One of those groups is NOW, who I've spent a lot of time criticising for some of their opinions in the past, but in this particular case, I have to admit, back in the 80s, they got it right. They were advocating for equality between men and women when it comes to the draft. What their policy is today, though, on the draft, I'm not sure. I can't say. It may have changed. But I have to give credit where credit is due. But the fact that there are feminist groups who have been fighting against the draft for men or women for a long time then makes me question, why do some feminists criticise MRAs for bringing up the draft? It seems strange. It appears that it's okay when they talk about it, yet when we talk about it, well, we're derailing or crying or moaning, or it's not important because it hasn't been enacted anyway. It seems a strange argument. Surely they should be supporting us, right? Anyway, let's continue with the article.
Apartheid South Africa only conscripted white males, whereas black males were only even allowed in the army at all as a last resort. Yet nobody in their right mind would conclude from this that apartheid oppressed white people more than it did blacks.
Okay, this is a really, really bad analogy. Let me explain why. Comparing whites during apartheid in South Africa to males in America and blacks in South Africa during apartheid to women in America is idiotic. Last I checked, women in America don't need signed permission from a man to travel from one place in America to another. Now, I know feminists say that they're oppressed in America. which is bullshit. Neither males nor females are oppressed in modern-day America. However, I would argue that the blacks in South Africa during apartheid were most definitely oppressed. And if you're a minority like the whites, who were oppressing the majority, which were the blacks, the last thing you want to do is give them guns and train them how to use those guns. I would think this would be pretty fucking simple and straightforward, pretty logical. I think anyone would be able to come to that simple conclusion. If you arm and train the people you're oppressing, they're likely to overthrow the government. Now, this isn't comparable to America. If we had a 50-50 male-female split in the military, women aren't suddenly going to overthrow the government. Well, maybe if we just filled it with feminists who wanted to smash the patriarchy. But your normal average woman isn't just going to overthrow the government. In fact, women in America can go buy guns anytime they want. I'm pretty sure blacks in South Africa didn't have that right. I'm pretty sure they couldn't just walk into a gun shop and buy guns. So it's a really bad analogy that doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. Next.
Similarly, until 2011, openly gay people were forbidden from serving in the U.S. military, and openly transgender people still are forbidden from serving in most militaries around the world, although the Pentagon intends to change that policy by 2016. And as with apartheid, nobody argues that this means heterosexual and cisgender people are or were more oppressed than LGBTQ+ people.
Okay, I would agree that LGBTQ people were discriminated against. Now, just because you discriminate against one group doesn't mean that other groups can't be discriminated against in different ways. Sure, preventing LGBTQ people from getting into the military is discrimination, just as forcing men against their will to join the military is also discrimination. But obviously the author can't understand that because there has to be an evil oppressor and an oppressed group, and there's no nuance. Everything's black and white. You can't have shades of grey. At least when you're talking about males, right? Next.
Some MRAs point to historical examples of when men were conscripted, such as during the two world wars, as proof that men were more discriminated against throughout history, with all nations exempting women from the conscription. However, it should be noted that disabled men were also exempt. Does this mean that able-bodied people were more discriminated than the disabled?
Once again, this is not a fair comparison. Obviously, you aren't going to enlist disabled men. You're not going to give a blind man a gun and tell him to shoot at the enemy. You're not going to push a man in a wheelchair across no man's land, firing at the enemy. For obvious fucking reasons. I shouldn't really have to explain. But once again, who is more discriminated against in this scenario? The blind man who isn't allowed to join the military for obvious reasons? Or the man who can see until he is forced into the military and loses his eyesight during the war? A man who isn't allowed into the military because he can't walk, or a man who is forced into the military and has both his legs blown off? Which is the greater discrimination, I have to ask? Simple question. Next.
No, it was simply because both women and disabled men were seen, rightly or wrongly, to be more of a burden than an asset.
Not more of a burden, but less able. Like I said earlier, men typically have more muscle mass and are typically stronger, therefore were seen to be more able. And this article makes that point right at the end, as did some of the feminists against females joining the draft. That, however, does not dispute the fact that men were required to do something that women were not. It was a burden or requirement placed on men which was not placed on women. That simple. Next.
Also, at least in World War II, male-only conscription for frontline combat roles was more rare than MRAs believe, as women had a large role in the Red Army.
Even if the Red Army was made up of 100% women, it's still one military in one war throughout all of human history. So even if I were to give the best case scenario to this article, it's still a weak fucking argument. But let's have a look at the claim anyway. So during World War II, the Soviet Union had 800,000 women serve in their military, which sounds like a hell of a lot until you look at the percentage of women in the military, which was 3%. And in fact, women were only allowed in the military after massive male losses. Now, to be fair, there were women wanting to volunteer before then, but they weren't allowed. Now, out of that 3%, only a very small percentage of that actually fought on the front lines. Now, once again, I have to give credit where credit is due. There were many women in the military that wanted to fight on the front lines but were prevented. Some even deserted and went to the front lines. And those who weren't on the front lines still played a major part in the military. So I have to give full credit to the Soviet women who fought in World War II. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. But what we're talking about is a small percentage of a small percentage in one military, in one war, throughout human history. I'm sorry, but that is not a good counter-argument to male disposability. Next.
While America kept women in support roles because they believed the general public would have an absolute cow otherwise.
Of course, this supports the notion that women are a protected class, right? Because if women were put on the front lines, the American population wouldn't have accepted it. I also find it very amusing that Rational Wiki uses the term absolute cow. So fucking professional. Next.
Moreover, the upper echelons of the military, and the government in general, are overwhelmingly male, and it is these people who decide both who gets into the military and where they are deployed. It might be more accurate to say, then, that this is less a problem of gender discrimination against men and more a problem of older male officers and armchair politicians playing games with the lives of their younger subordinate soldiers. Of course, in some cases that is unreasonable to both say and do, as soldiers are investments in of themselves, and some death costs doesn't account for lost valued experience, gear, and training lost. Anti-war protesters have said something similar for decades.
Okay, just because the military higher-ups and politicians are mainly male does not mean that they have male best interest in mind, nor does that exclude them from being protective of women. This is not a counter-argument to male disposability. Next.
In rare cases, such as in North and South Korea, men are conscripted into a relatively riskier military service for less than market rate pay and comparatively poor living conditions. This may be a legitimate complaint for men in these countries, but neither is representative of a Western, first world country in which many MRAs claim citizenship, nor is either country an ideal towards which feminists worldwide aspire.
I have to wonder if females were suddenly forced into the draft, whether the author of this piece would suddenly change their mind. Suddenly it would become a big deal, right? Suddenly it would be unfair and the draft should be scrapped for everyone. Include women in the draft, and I think the argument suddenly would be a little bit more important. Next.
Note also that evolutionary psychology predicts that males are more disposable than females. Sperms are metabolically cheap to produce in the millions, while pregnancy is metabolically costly. This difference is generally accepted by many MRA advocates in other contexts. It also predicts that men will be disposable in war in ways that women are not, that men will be significantly overrepresented in dangerous jobs, and other objects of MRA complaint.
Yeah, this is an argument I've made before, as well as many other MRAs. It actually supports our point that males are more disposable, or seen as more disposable. In a 9-month period, a woman can have one pregnancy, whereas a single male can impregnate numerous women. So from a reproductive point of view, men are far more disposable than women, which is why women historically have been more protected. That's why we don't send them off to war. However, in the modern age, we are overpopulated. We don't have a problem with reproducing. So men and women should be seen as equally disposable or valuable. It's no longer an argument. It explains why in the past men have been more disposable, but it's not an argument to use presently.
In terms of physical fitness, men are more suited towards frontline duties and physical labor due to generally more durable and stronger musculoskeletal systems. However, this wouldn't exclude women from certain combat roles, such as pilots, as seen with the case of Kim Campbell, a 10 pilot.
Yes, and I agree totally. Anyone who can do a particular job in the military should have the opportunity to do it if they choose to. And not all roles have to be combat. There are plenty of support roles in the military, which is actually an argument for including women in the draft, right? Even if you believe women are less physically capable of being frontline troops, there are still many other positions which they could fulfill. But it amazes me that these things don't really seem to be an issue until they affect women. And then all of a sudden the draft is an injustice. I mean, this Rational Wiki article has spent its entire time making excuses. Instead of coming out and saying, the draft is unjust, it's a clear example of a double standard, something which is required of men but not women, and we agree with MRAs that it's wrong. Instead of saying that, what they do is they try to diminish and dismiss it any way possible. And I'm sorry, when you do that, you're not fighting for equality. You're fighting for a double standard.